No. Kevin spoke to me last time I was here, and I did not know who I was talking to. So is he here? Okay. I think he led singing last time I was here, and I was so embarrassed when I found out that was Kevin Law, and I didn't recognize him. But 50 years can change things, or close to 50 years. Well, it's been close to that since I sat on the dunking machine at Oakmont School wearing a three-piece suit and eating my dinner. I ate my dinner on the dunking machine. Carol, you remember that? And nobody dunked me. I don't know if they were afraid to or couldn't hit the target. I'm not sure which it was. But I'd like tonight to look with you at some advice from the book of Proverbs. And I want to read some verses. Five of the verses have already been read, but I want to read some more. And I want you to think about what three sins those verses represent. Three specific sins. As you listen to them and you think about what they're saying, I want us to come up with three specific sins that those verses represent. I'm going to start with chapter 10 of Proverbs. I'm going to look at verse 8 first. The wise in heart accepts commands, but a chattering fool comes to ruin. Verse 17. He who heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray. Chapter 12. I'm going to look at verse 15 first. Proverbs 12:15. The way of a fool seems right to him, but a wise man listens to advice. Verse 16. A fool shows his annoyance at once, but a prudent man overlooks an insult. Verse 18. Reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Chapter 13, verse 3. He who guards his lips guards his life, but he who speaks rashly will come to ruin. Chapter 15. We're going to look here at verse 12 first. A mocker resents correction. He will not consult the wise. Verse 18. A hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. Chapter 19. And we've already read from 17 and 18. Chapter 19, verse 19. A hot-tempered man must pay the penalty. And listen to this. This is interesting. If you rescue him, you will have to do it again. Chapter 22, verse 24. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered. And two more verses from chapter 29, verse 11. A fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. In verse 22, an angry man stirs up dissension, and a hot-tempered one commits many sins. Okay, have you figured out the three sins that are prominent in those verses or the subject of those verses? One of them is being easily angered, right? Being easily angered. The second one, not listening to good advice, not taking good advice. And the third one is not controlling the tongue. Well, have I been guilty of those at some time or another? I think I have, and I imagine you have at some point. Solomon used the word foolish or fool more than 60 times in the book of Proverbs. The word fool used more than 60 times. And yet Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 22, he said, if you call a person a fool, you're in danger of hellfire. Let's go to those verses. I want to read that whole verse. Matthew 5:22. I used to tell people I don't have the passages go to them ahead of time because I want them to be able to keep up with me, and I like to hear the pages turning. And people said, well, we're not turning the pages because we've got it on our phone. See, I'm still back in the old days. And now some of you are using your phone and you can find them that way. Well, that's fine. But Matthew 5:22 or 21, let's start there. You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who's angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. The word Raka meaning empty-headed or not having any sense. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of fires of hell. Well, Solomon called people fools or foolish more than 60 times in the book of Proverbs. And you might say, well, that's the Old Testament. And when Jesus came, he set a new standard, higher standard that we see in the Sermon on the Mount. But there are 3 times in the New Testament that God or Jesus called somebody a fool. So what's with that? Look at Luke chapter 20, Luke chapter 12, verse 20. Luke 12, verse 20. This is God speaking of the man who decided to tear down his barns and build greater barns so that he could eat, drink, and be merry. God says in verse 20, God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Okay, look at Luke chapter 11, verse 40. Now, I have New International Version, but if you have the King James Version, the word fool is going to be there. I'll read it as though I'm reading from King James. You fools, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? But give what is inside the dish to the poor, and everything will be cleaned for you. New International says, you foolish people, and then goes on from there. Okay, look at Luke chapter 24, verse 25. Luke chapter 24, verse 25. This is Jesus speaking again. This is after Jesus' resurrection. Jesus said to them, or he said to them, how foolish you are. But as I say in King James, it says, what fools you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? Now let's look at one more, Matthew 23, verse 17. Matthew 23, verse 17. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides! You strain out a gnat but swallow a camel. I believe I'm right that the word fool is found in that passage as well in King James. So, what's the deal with the verse that says, don't call a person a fool? And yet Jesus did. Yet God did. You might say, well, Jesus could and God could because they know everything. Well, I have a Bible scholar that I went to several years ago, and I said, I need some help with this. Why does it say, don't call a person a fool, and yet we find fool many, many times in the Bible? And this Bible scholar said there are several meanings of the word fool. And in Matthew chapter 5, where the word fool is used, it is saying, do not call anybody worthless. And that makes sense. How dare me, or how dare you or me to call a person a fool who is created in the image of God? How dare say anybody is worthless? Jesus died for every person. Jesus died for every soul. So every soul, regardless of how they live, is of value to God. And God wants every person to be his child. So that helps me to understand those passages better. But let's go back to those three sins that have been mentioned. The three of the most prominent, if not the most prominent sins in the book of Proverbs. Did you ever know a fool or a foolish person? I have, and I want to tell you a couple that I heard about. Didn't know them personally, but I heard these stories about two very foolish people that I want to share with you just for the interest of it. It's easy to point and laugh at others, but what about me or about you? But I'll share these two interesting cases. There was a preacher. Now, some of you are old enough to maybe remember because they covered it in the Nashville newspaper for several days. There was a preacher in Nashville that was making holy wine in the basement of his church. And he got arrested for making holy wine in the basement of the church. And so he decided that he was going to get a casket, and he was going to get in the casket, and he wasn't going to get out until they dropped the charges. Well, he got in that casket, and he stayed for quite a while, and they never dropped the charges. And he finally decided that God was going to let him out of that casket. So he got out of the casket. But that's a very foolish person. Another one that I heard about, I don't know if you heard this story or not, but a man in Colombia, that an older man that some younger lady realized he had some money, and she decided, she'd latch on to him, and so he married her, and fell in love. I think they married, and he got her a house trailer and got her some furniture, and some nice clothes, and even bought her a set of false teeth. Well, she got all of that and then decided she wasn't in love with him. So she left him, and he went to her and took the trailer away from her, and took the furniture away from her, and even took the false teeth and put them in his back pocket. And he said, I'm going to keep those teeth in my back pocket, so every time I sit down on them, they'll bite me, and I'll remember what a fool I was. So people can be very foolish, but have you not, and have I not been guilty of those three sins sometime or another? Do you get angry on the road when somebody does something that is problematic with you and with your driving, cutting you off, or whatever they've done? Doesn't it makes us angry sometimes. And sometimes we tend to not want to take good advice. We'll think our way's a better way. And then what about the tongue? Haven't we all been guilty of saying something that later we wished we had not said and wish we could take it back? But you know what? The most common sin that's committed today, I would dare say the most common sin committed today was the very first sin ever committed. Deciding our way is better than God's way. Isn't that probably the case? The most common sin, deciding my way is better than God's way. Well, I want to look at Solomon for a minute. Solomon, we say, was the wisest man that ever lived. But I also say he was the most foolish man that ever lived. And that may shock you, but we're going to look at some passages that you need to know about in regard to Solomon. And the sin that he had the most trouble with is the middle one, not taking advice. And let's start with Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14. So turn to Deuteronomy 17. Deuteronomy 17. And we're going to start with verse 14. This is Moses speaking to the people. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you and have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like the nations around us. Be sure to appoint over you the king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your own brothers. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not a brother Israelite. The king, moreover, now listen to this, must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. Second commandment, or rule, he must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. And third, he must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. Those are the three commands. Now, and look at what else it says here. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the priests who are Levites. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of the law and these decrees, and not consider himself better than his brothers and turn from the law to the right or to the left. Those are three commands that the king of Israel, when they decide to have a king, must write in his own handwriting and read them every day. So let's look at how well Solomon did with those. Look at 1 Kings chapter 3. 1 Kings chapter 3, and we're going to look at verse 1. Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married his daughter. Been told he's supposed to have written this in his own handwriting. Don't go back to Egypt. Don't go back that way. And yet his very first wife is Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, look at chapter 10, 1 Kings 10, beginning with verse 26. I do hear some pages turning. That makes me feel better. I'm not the only one still in the dark ages. Okay, chapter 10, verse 26. Solomon accumulated chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he kept in the chariot cities and also with him in Jerusalem. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedar as plentiful as sycamore fig trees in the foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Kue. The royal merchants purchased them from Kue. They imported a chariot from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver and a horse for 150. Okay, turn to 1 Kings 11. We're right there already. Verses 1 through 6. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter: Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely as David his father had done. One more passage, 1 Kings 10. Let's go back there, verses 14 through 21. The weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents, not including the revenues from merchants and traders and from all the Arabian kings and the governors of the land. King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 600 bekas of gold went into each shield. He also made 300 small shields of hammered gold, with 300 minas of gold in each shield. The king put them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. Then the king made a great throne, inlaid with ivory and overlaid with fine gold. The throne had 6 steps, and its back had a rounded top. On both sides of the seat were armrests, with a lion standing beside them. 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, one at each end of each step. Nothing like it had ever been made for any other kingdom. All Solomon's goblets were gold. All the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. The king had a fleet of, well, let's see, I needed to stop there. So here, the wisest man that ever lived, in my opinion, may have been the most foolish man that ever lived. And I wanted to share that with you tonight. And hopefully you've read something you hadn't read before. But you know, it's foolishness to not obey God. We must be living in faithful obedience to God. It's foolishness to believe that I've got tomorrow for sure. Sharon and I went to the funeral of Ken Wiles, who grew up in Madison and was in Columbia, had been a principal in Columbia, and his wife, Debbie, was the director of elementary schools in Murray County. We went to his funeral Thursday, and he and his wife had been on vacation. They came home from vacation May the 2nd, and he had a doctor's appointment for his annual checkup. Went for his checkup, and they said, "You've got tumors of cancer where your gallbladder and your pancreas and all that comes together." He had surgery. He never recovered. They had packed the car last Sunday morning to go to hospice on Patterson Street in Nashville, and he never got in the car. So it's foolishness to believe we've got tomorrow or next week or many, many years yet to go. So I invite you to come at the Lord's invitation as we stand to sing.